kind of talking about like specifics of going into like how are companies, Andy, kind of implementing some of these governance processes? Like what are some of the steps and that they're putting into place to meet some of these regulatory requirements, and then, as I like to put them, commercial requirements?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned a couple already, and I found the one really interesting, but without solution, really. The benchmark you were saying, like testing, and it's one really major aspect is the testing and auditing piece, because that's so different. And I see clients struggle often with like the baseline, checking the results of the AI against like the baseline. Like what is the baseline, and like what was the prior baseline? Was it unbiased? Like was everything we decided in the past unbiased? I think that's a really interesting aspect, and also an aspect very positive about with AI we can be better than before, even in our biased or non-biased decisions. Yeah. So that's an area to play with, like not just say, okay, we compare like to previous situations, but be creative. And generally the aspect of testing is very important. So don't just like test the functionality, but call it pressure testing. Put it to the maximum, to the edge, and try to see where does the AI fail, where could be mistakes. A bit similar like we do it in IT security, but not only on the IT security aspect, but also on the content aspect and on the results, and to then keep on monitoring the performance. Is that you're nodding?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about this, we start thinking about testing that closed environment and that sandbox environment at the start, and really pressure testing, pushing it to the extremes. And then once you've done that and you think things are going okay, like broadening it out, we often use our own employees to in a closed beta test to say we have 1,000 employees, let's say. That's a good subset of people to again pressure test again, give us feedback. It's the pressure that you do still have to balance that, like the pace that the business want to go in and the pace the business want to show this new tool that we've been working months on. But it's really important, and that employee stage is a good stage. And then after that, putting it out in phases. You can one jurisdiction, maybe a jurisdiction that doesn't have as many stringent laws, you test it out there, and you really try and find or provide customers, users of these tools with avenues to give you feedback. So then you can maybe put new guardrails in place if need to be and things like that. That's the kind of way we think about it from like a high level sense.
I want to highlight that last piece, right, of the testing it and getting the feedback, because there's no such thing as having a perfect solution from the start. That's never been the case ever, where everything you're going to put out has no faults, no bugs, no errors, but the plan to address it is going to be really important. And how do you address it quickly, right? So putting it out in a sandbox version versus putting it out in the real world, where it may be like a low stakes real world test, and then being able to quickly action and change how fix it based off of the feedback that you're getting and the performance that you're seeing. But again, you need to know what you're expecting to see to begin with. And I think that sometimes in the world of content, media, and advertising, that can also be really tough. We know that when it comes to very technical AI solutions, because we're replacing an existing solution. But when it comes to, for example, information generation, right? How do you verify what information is being put out is actually accurate? And that then comes back to your protocols around, this doesn't mean you get to take the human element out of the entire use of AI, because at the end of the day, there's still a process right now where it still needs to be verified. And sometimes AI can verify AI, but at some point there's a human in the loop to sit down and look at it and say, is this really what should have been generated? Is this really the end result of this product? And that, to me, is a really large part of AI governance that we don't want to lose in the policies and the procedures and the iterations and the testing, is the loss of human judgment at the very end of, is this whole process working, to verify that our governance process is working, but also still that despite our governance process, there's this product at the end of the day is still a viable, commercially viable product as well. So with that in mind, do we want to take a look at some use cases?
So yeah, the first use case we're going to look at is plan mode. This is one of our tools, and so this, is our attempt at the discovery phase. You're planning a trip. It might be 6 months before, 2 months before. You can go on our app, our website, and you can click Plan with AI, and you put in some information, who's coming with you, you're going solo, you're going with friends, family. You put in where you're going, so I put in Austin here for 5 days, and it will start giving you recommendations based on, I'm logged in this scenario, so it knows a bit about me, it knows kind of my choices, when I've chosen to agree to personalization, all of that kind of thing, and it will give you an itinerary that you can then save, you can edit it, you can and it builds recommendations based on your own data.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on something you were saying, Nikki, about the human verification piece. Don't underplay that, don't understate that. When we're talking about safety, it is very easy just to focus on transparency and disclaimers and say, well, I've told you, I've said it's AI generated, hashtag AI generated. But I think the point you're raising here is, that's great, huge check. But what if we're creating this itinerary for Austin and it's taking us to somewhere that could put us in physical danger? It's taking us to a road that's going to take us off the edge of a cliff. Awful experience for multiple reasons, and undermines the viability and the value of the product. So yes, it's very important to think about our legal disclaimers and disclosures and bringing the user on the journey so they can make an informed choice, and they can, and of course we link out to how it operates in user-friendly language, etc. But it's an incredibly important point. The product's also got to work on a fundamental commercial perspective as well.
Yeah. And, I know we're talking about safety, right? But again, the trust aspect of this is so important, particularly with AI when it comes to media and entertainment, because it's not necessarily, I think we blindly trust a lot of the information that is provided to us because we don't necessarily approach it with the same level of sophistication and thought and discretion as things that have more impact on us, right? Like when we're making financial decisions or when we're making legal decisions, we think more about that, presumably. And, we study more, we verify more of that. But when you are just reading something on TripAdvisor, right? This is why the reviews are so important, because I'm not digging into every review and saying, like, can I find this person? Were they a real person? Is this a real review? I want to be able to trust that review so that I know where I should stay and where I should go. And so when you have even products that, when we talk about regulation, so much regulation is focused on high-risk products for a reason. Those have significant impacts on your rights, your health, very, very important aspects of your life. And sometimes, we say, well, okay, the rest of it is just, it's low risk, right? And I'm not saying that it's not low risk, but it still has an impact in how we interact with media and how we interact with companies and how we interact with brands. It forms how I, as a consumer, say, like, well, am I going to go back to this website again because, they told me that, I should go to this restaurant and it's actually permanently closed. So now I don't know if I can use this. I have to now use another site. And that has an impact on me, but it also has an impact on the company itself. And so all of those are really important, again, leading back to that trust aspect and that safety aspect as well. And one thing we didn't talk about is, where does some of that error come in? That comes in from the data that we're absorbing to begin with, which is, again, another thing that we're not used to necessarily thinking about with technical solutions, is where did the data come from to begin with? Who put that data out? Was that data tested and verified? Was it accurate? Was it even about Austin, right? Or was it about another city and someone just kind of put in like data about Texas? So is it even relevant for the audience that it's being used for? Those are all newer questions when it comes to governance of these kinds of tech products. So, I didn't want to lose kind of those ideas just generally in talking about any kind of media product, right? Not specifically this review process, which was awesome.
Now, just a couple of questions to help the audience as well when they do similar things in their organization. So this was created by, developed internally, right? Can you roughly describe who was leading this in the organization, and how did the governance piece of parties, stakeholders involved, just roughly, how did this work? And I mean, given the external facing, the trust is so important. How does the monitoring work? I mean, that is like the examples you just said. It shows, if this happens, so there needs to be good monitoring.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to take the stakeholders. I don't know if you want to speak to the model testing phase, but so I spoke about the process that we set up at the beginning in order to get it approval, and this use case, like others, was put through that approval. So the kinds of stakeholders that are looking over initiative of this type, first and foremost, do you have VP or plus approval? Because the amount of times you will spend X number of hours working on something to realise it wasn't approved by the right person internally on the business side. So that's a foundation. Of course, expense. To the extent we're supplementing with toolings, have our finance team, our FP&A team signed off, etc. We have a dedicated trust and safety team. Trust and safety, fraud, content moderation, as you'd reasonably assume. So for an initiative like this, they're tagged in early on as a key stakeholder. Product, engineering, UX, design. The lawyers can advise on the disclaimers, on the AI in use, etc. But where I can see our 4.0 going to is using those disclaimers as a way to be more on brand. I think, and I'm really interested in what's happening in Europe right now to standardize these disclosures. We're starting to hear discussion around, will there be uniform badges? We have to make it easy for consumers to recognize. We can't have them scroll down or have legal degrees or read font size 8 privacy policies to work out that this is even happening. So I'm interested, if we have time, perhaps to talk about what's going on from a regulatory perspective on labelling, but we want to bring brand and marketing on that journey with us. We want to explain what the legal obligation is to disclose that it's AI generated and some of these safety issues. And I think you can see here, we link out to learn more, where we encourage folks to, this has been AI generated, do your homework before you go and get in that car and drive up the hill kind of thing. We're pointing them to that. But I do think I can see our next iteration focusing on more kind of on-brand disclosures and explainers. Otherwise, then, I mentioned the engineers are deeply involved in the testing process. Of course, we're lawyers that sit in the compliance arm of the department. We also wear a couple of hats. I serve as a group data protection officer, so I'm looking at this from a privacy perspective also. And then we're looking at it from an AI risk assessment. Now, we touched on the fact earlier on that we don't have multiple different legal standards for how an AI-specific regulatory assessment should be completed. So we model, our North Star is on the European Union's AI Act, and that's very similar to how we operationalise our privacy compliance. We couldn't have 25 different forms, wouldn't go down well, wouldn't look good. So we look for the highest common denominators, and then we set that standard.
That's a very, very important point.
Right.
Just want to pick up something Vanessa said about disclosure and transparency and trust. As Vanessa said, these disclosures, version 4.0, we can start imparting some of our own brand, our own personality, the TripAdvisor personality, and I think that is really key to building trust, because we were in that Waymo yesterday, remember? Yeah. And the Waymo, as you go in, it starts talking to you, it gives It gives you information about, if you call support, then we can listen to you, but otherwise, we're not listening to anything you do, so sing your heart out. And we looked at each other and thought, actually, that's a really great way of getting that compliance statement in there, but also in a fun way that we thought we then probably more likely to trust the way.
Sorry, I'm just imagining our street cred, what the audience think of that. We're in a Waymo talking about privacy disclosures. You're like, what? So, but we thought we were quite cool.
We did.
Yeah.